I think the whole idea that like any and all Arminians are just Pelagians, I think that's just kind of, that seems to be all over the place. I mean, the idea that like if you believe in some free will, that you believe in just kind of this radical free will, that you can like pick and choose like your own, or you can just
gender.
like
you can pick your gender. Oh, just kidding. Hey everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. And something that matters a lot is theology, and sometimes we take it for granted, but it's something that does matter, and we do need to talk about. We're talking about Arminian theology. I'm not an Arminian, but I have only heard most of my life kind of caricatures of Arminians and Arminianism and things like that. And so I said, I got to talk to an Arminian. So I found one. But I ran into a Chris Talbot. He is getting his doctorate from Southeastern Seminary. He teaches at Welch College right now. He's a husband and a father. And this is a good conversation talking about some specifics, Romans 9, Ephesians 1 and 2, and John 6, and just really kind of a surface level understanding of Arminianism and what that tradition believes. It's actually pretty revealing, and I think you might learn something even if you aren't Arminian at all. So we always want to be sharpened. That's the one thing that I seek to do, especially on this channel, talk about things that matter, like I said, and having that understanding a bit better. So I hope this is a good conversation that you enjoy. Chris Talbot, welcome to the show, brother. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing so well. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, I know this is the first time you're on the show, and talking about theological matters, Arminian theology particularly. Why don't you just tell a bit about who you are and the audience, and just share a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up in Southeast Michigan. My family, I think they would probably have said that they were nominally Christian. We kind of jumped around from church to church growing up, and so I often tell my students here at the college I teach at that I got a little bit of variety of everything. So sometimes we would go to an evangelical free church, other times we'd go to a Wesleyan church, we went to a Nazarene church, so we just kind of jumped around, Southern Baptist, a little bit of everything. And then as a teenager, I remember a friend asking me to go to this youth event with the church that he was part of. It was a little bit of a bait and switch, which I generally don't recommend. It's like like an evangelistic tactic. But we were on our way, and they told us that we were going to go to a service, and it was at that youth service that I'm sure I'd heard the gospel plenty of times before, but that was the first time that it really clicked for me that I was a sinner in need of redemption, that Christ had paid my punishment upon the cross, had conquered over death and sin, and that if I repented of my sin and trusted in him, that I could experience eternal life. And so I gave my life to Christ then. I was maybe 13 or 14. Felt a call to preach, in my later teen years. Long story short, I ended up coming to the college I now work at to study pastoral ministry. So I got a bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry theological studies. Went on to be a youth pastor in North Carolina. Did my master's at Grace College in ministry, and then came back here to Welch to teach youth and family ministry. And so been here for about 10 years. I teach youth and family ministry, teach a few Bible theology courses in like worldview and culture as well. Working on my Ph.D. in apologetics and culture right now. And probably the best thing is I'm married. I've been married for about 10 years now, and I have 3 wonderful boys, but they keep our house pretty active. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's good. Praise God, brother. Well, that's good. So, so you're teaching. Where is Welch, by the way? I probably should have looked that up. Is it in Tennessee?
It is, yeah. So we for a long time we were in the heart of Nashville. We used to be called Free Will Baptist Bible College, but changed our name a few years back. But now we're in Gallatin, Tennessee, which is just north of Nashville, maybe about 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. That's not too far from me. Yeah, we're about 2 hours from Nashville. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, so kind of kick this off on how I found you on Twitter, although I recently deleted my Twitter quietly. I didn't tell anybody, unlike some people. I don't have enough self-control, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm back off Twitter. I was off it for about 4 years, but I left the account dormant. Now I just deleted it. So anyway, not to make that a big thing. But before I did that, I found you and James White at the G3 conference had mentioned something about Arminians being open theists or the same or however it was. And I saw your comment. And one thing that, some people might be like, why are you talking to an Arminian? I know I have a lot of Reformed or Calvinist, and they're not always the same on the audience, and that's fine. Great. I'm not Arminian. I don't lean that way necessarily. But one thing I don't know is a lot about Arminian theology. I really don't. Through seminary, we went to a couple different good churches, Bible church and a Baptist church in Louisville. And one thing that I really see as a detriment to a lot of circles, whether you're a Calvinist and you're like, Arminians, or Arminians, you're like, stupid Calvinists, whatever, or anything in between, is people don't read the scholars and understand the actual content. They look at a straw man, and I don't think they know they're looking at a straw man. And I don't know if the preachers or the pastors necessarily are intentionally doing a straw man, but I heard loads of straw man, especially years ago, about Arminianism. I mean, the most distinction was Arminian, not Armenian. Of course, there's a country named Armenia. And it was one of the first countries, after I think 2nd, 3rd century that was officially a Christian nation that still technically is a Christian nation. And that was about it. And it was just like, well, I know I'm not Armenian, but it's like, why? So I saw you and I thought, you know what? We need to have a show about this because I know a lot about Calvinism, Reformed theology. Of course, there's 20 different stripes of that. All the different points and 4.5 point, 4 point, 5 point, 8 point, 1 point, yada, yada, yada. And, whether you're a Presbyterian or a Bible Christian or a Baptist or whatever, there's so many flavors of Calvinists. I'm sure there are of Arminians as well. Yeah. So why don't you just kind of, first of all, are open theists and Arminians the same? What do you think?
Yeah, well,
or why or why not, I guess.
Obviously our interaction started with that. I responded, and I was being a little bit, probably a little too harsh. I think I responded to James White by saying something like, show me that you've never read Arminian theology, but without, saying that you've never read any Arminian theology. I just thought it was kind of a caricature. Yeah. That said, and I do want to be charitable here, I think there are plenty of Arminians that are also open theists. So it's not like that position doesn't exist. I mean, I think there's plenty that would argue that. But I think your point that there's a lot of different stripes of Calvinists, I think the very same thing is true about Arminians. There's a lot of different types of Arminians. And so to kind of treat them monolithically, I think is an error. And so my particular flavor of Arminianism is what we call within the Free Baptist denomination Reformed Arminianism, which sounds like an oxymoron. I think a lot of people would hear that and think, well, that seems to be the opposite of it. But our argument would be that Arminius is essentially like a partner in the Reformation rather than a departure from it. Maybe another way to put that
historically, that's true. I mean, I would say that's accurate anyway.
No, right, exactly. And that essentially that he has much more in common with Calvin rather than disagreement. And so we tend to, overemphasize the TULIP acronym. But I think there's a lot that they share in common. Now, that said, that's my particular faith tradition. There's Wesleyan Arminianism. There's, traditionalist Southern Baptists that are, I would argue, seem to be kind of a form of Arminianism. They're kind of a 1 point Calvinist. So there's a lot of different flavors. And so to just kind of condense or collapse those into just one, I think would be an error. So
what is open theist? I know you're not an open theist, doesn't sound like. But how would you define someone who's an open theist? Just maybe we'll have an open theist at some point on the show as well. Sure. I haven't yet. But what do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not an open theist, not super proficient like in their theology, but essentially like God doesn't exhaustively know the future, right? He doesn't have clear foreknowledge of what's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. And so why then? So you said some Arminians might be open theists. That's fair. Okay, fine. I mean, I would say just like some Calvinists are determinists. I mean, they're basically fatalists. If you read it and you look at someone who's not a Christian and they have chance or random processes as, I mean, this is what Richard Dawkins and many others, you read this, and if you were just to put God instead of evolution or gravity or chance or whatever, instead of that, it would read just like a deterministic Calvinist. And there are some, Bignon is one, I don't know how you live your life like that, but that's his thing. I think, and I want to be, charitable in one sense, because at the end of the day, I think most people are trying to make much of Christ and understand the word and understand where they are in history. I think, I mean, maybe not everybody, but you want to love, hopes all things, believes all things, endures all things. And so I don't know how you can do that, but that's your conviction, not mine. Ultimately God's massive and so much more exhaustive than we could ever imagine. Yet at the same time, he still revealed himself in Jesus Christ. Sure. And so he has written his word. He has shown it. You look at Psalm 19, Romans 1, that even the creation screams about a creator. But we don't know everything we know that there is to know about God, of course. Right. So anyway, so I guess then what is the difference between an Arminian, I know many probably be, Calvinist, Arminian, kind of just your standard run-of-the-mill, but an Arminian and an open theist. So open theists say God can't know the future, hence the openness of it.
Right.
What is the take that you have or others in your tradition that see that? And so God, he can know the future, but he doesn't cause it, or how does that work out?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. We would just say that God's foreknowledge is not causal knowledge. God knows the future. He knows exactly what's going to happen. And so when we read those passages of scripture that talks about how God foreknew, and we'll get into this, but even that he elected us before the foundations of the earth, there's ways I think that you can hold that are still consistent within like an Arminian framework. We don't want to diminish God anyway. We don't want to say that he doesn't have omniscience, right? Like we believe that he has absolute foreknowledge, absolute knowledge of all things, and yet still allows us to have free will.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So would you say then, because a lot of times people will say, well, there's no free will in the Bible, or it's not talked about in the Bible, or it's not mentioned in the Bible. Then of course you could retort, I like to say cats aren't in the Bible either, or combustion engines or anything else. Yeah. And so there's a level of tongue in cheek with anything. Trinity, of course, isn't in the Bible as far as a word, things like that. But that's one thing that. So say I'm your typical Calvinist, and I say, Chris, come on, man, you Arminians, you worship at the altar of free will. Yeah. How do you respond? Because I'm sure you've had that online or in person at some point in your life. What do you say to somebody who says that?
Yeah, and I think just to kind of go to bat for like my particular theological tradition, we too, I think, have a pretty strong view of like human depravity as well. And so we would agree with the Calvinists and say without like the working of the Spirit, like we're unable to respond to God's calling. It's only when through like the preaching of the gospel and the work of the Spirit that our hearts are softened, that we the difference between what we might call effectual calling for the Calvinists and prevenient grace for the Reformed Arminian aren't radically different. It's only that we would say that once your heart is softened, you have the opportunity then to decline, right?
I see.
So we're not arguing some type of like Pelagian position where like we just have this this unrestricted free will. We think that sin has affected like our mind and our hearts as well, and that we have a need for the Spirit too. It's just that at the end of the day, there is some amount of will that we're exerting, and it's not just God choosing us, kind of against whatever agency we might have.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we'll get into Ephesians 1 and Romans 9 here in a sec. Yeah. What verses or biblical theology do you go to
Hmm.
in the Bible to say we have free will? Because again, somebody say, "Oh, I don't have free will. You just love your free will." And I hear that all the time. I heard that for years,
Yeah.
from guys like James White and others. And to be fair to him, he's not fair to a lot of non-Calvinists and/or former Calvinists. He's
Yeah.
very charitable to Muslims and Mormons and homosexuals and leftists and people like that. But and you can watch it. And if you don't believe me, somebody watching now, just go listen to a debate between a Muslim and James White, and then James White and Leighton Flowers, or somebody like that who used to be a Calvinist or something. There's such a disdain, and and I want to love James White, but anyway, this isn't about him necessarily, although that's what kind of started our conversation. And I don't understand that really, other than just, hey, we're all sinners and we all have our preferences, and sometimes we'll say the cruelest, meanest thing to our wife or our kids would we never say to anyone else. So somebody who's so close to us, we're almost more wicked toward, than the old lady on the street or the cashier at Walmart or whatever. So where do you go for the free will? What verses do you look at and say, hey, we obviously have free will?
Yeah. But by the way, I think on Twitter this morning I saw that James White called Leighton Flowers a Pelagian. So he was up early this morning trying to get at it. Yeah, I think I don't want to just be too kind of like tongue in cheek here, but I think we would go quickly to those passages like in Acts and in the book of Romans that seem to just allude to, what must I do to be saved? Well, repent and believe. And so it seems that the biblical writers, as they're recording these things, allude to some type of like human agency. They say, all right, how do I receive this eternal salvation? Well, I act upon it, right? Like it's not by my works, but it's by my belief, right? It's something that I'm trusting in. And I think too, like even if you go back to Genesis like 1 and 2, like it seems like God's given Adam and Eve free will. Even someone like Alvin Plantinga kind of bases his whole theodicy against the problem of evil on an argument for free will in some capacity. So then it would seem to me too that most Calvinists, not kind of the extreme determinists, but most Calvinists would agree to some level of human agency. Maybe they would call it like a freed will, but that everything, it's not just this meticulous providence where we're all kind of automatons, So again, I think there's probably more in common there than what we realize.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that, similar to maybe the cessationist or continuationist debate, whether there's tongues and healings and visions and all that is still active or not. Somebody, like a John MacArthur, of course, firm Calvinist, also firm cessationist, he would point to like, 1 Corinthians, 13, about, when the perfect comes, that will be done away with, meaning the Bible, which I don't take that approach at all. He's clearly talking about death in the context, but anyway, similarly in Genesis 1 and 2, like you just said with Adam and Eve, there is no passage that says the gifts cease, although I personally think they pretty much have. But there's no passage that says that. Just like there's no passage that says, and you lost free will, or you lost a human agency, or you lost your libertarian responsibility. I mean, do you see that? Have you gotten into debates or discussions in the classroom or with others about that? And I mean, is there a verse? I mean, I don't know of one, or what is the Calvinist or someone like that use to say, no, we've lost it. Absolutely. Adam and Eve had it, but we lost it. Of course, that gives a lapsarian, sublapsarian, post-lapsarian.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that might be part of the case. I think when you're listening to kind of the tone of Scripture, it seems like there's some like human agency that's happening. You think even like of Jonah, right? Like he's walking away from what the Lord's calling him to do, right? There's not just this automatic force against like God forcing him to do all these things, but rather kind of a back and forth. I don't think that and I'm sympathetic to this. I think that there's a concern, though, if we say, well, if we have too much free will, or if we emphasize free will, then like we seem to diminish God's sovereignty. But again, I think God can be sovereign. God can be in control. God has immediate action in all things that we do. and yet allows us to operate according to his ultimate will, but still exert our own free will at the same time.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you don't necessarily know of, I mean, has anybody used a verse to say, well, Genesis 3, clearly Adam and Eve lost their free will, lost their agency?
Yeah, I'm sure somebody has. I'm not familiar with that though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not either. I was just curious because I think there's a lot of built-in assumptions about XYZ thing, and yet we don't actually know, or there isn't really a Bible verse. We just kind of assume it. Yeah, I know what I've heard. Again, this is a learning experience for me, even right now. But one thing that I've heard a lot, you're worshiping the altar of free will, which obviously doesn't sound like you are. And I've never seen anybody. And and again, it's funny that I don't know why we do this, because I guess it's just our own human sin, right? And then you have to say, well, did God determine this, or do we have a free will, right? Are people responsible for, characterizing, mischaracterizing, straw manning, etc.? But I know one thing that I hear, especially from the James Whites and guys like that, they seem to indicate, and maybe it's because their listeners, their readers, their followers don't know. And again, I hope this is a learning experience even now for many of my audience. But it's like, it seems like they think, the Arminian thinks that they're just free to do whatever, and they're outside of God, and they can pick and choose whatever they want and do whatever they want, and I'll turn to Christ or I won't, and God can't tell me what to do. Like, that's how it seems. Have you experienced this as well?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. I think there's even been conferences that I've attended, just as someone that shows up, and there was maybe a good handful of people that had a more Reformed or Calvinist view, and they kind of had certain like assumptions about like what I believed about things.
Yeah,
I think the whole idea that like any and all Arminians are just Pelagians, I think that's just kind of, that seems to be all over the place. I mean, the idea that like if you believe in some free will, that you believe in just kind of this radical free will, that you can like pick and choose like your own, or you can just
gender. You can pick your gender.
But yeah, you can just kind of choose salvation outside of any working of God. But I that works, I think, contrary to what the Bible teaches, and I think it goes against like what even Arminius himself argues. I think actually I think a lot of the problems that we run into in this bigger debate is a good handful of people we're not reading a whole lot of primary sources, right? We're not reading Arminius. We're not even reading, I'm not a Wesleyan Arminian, but we're not reading Wesley either. We kind of give into, and you alluded to this, but we give into caricatures. We think of like Arminian must mean this person that just believes in radical free will, and the Calvinist is like a radical determinist, and never the twain shall meet, so they're kind of on opposite ends of each other. Now, and I would just argue that they're actually much closer, at least some are.
Yeah. I mean, I love R.C. Sproul as well, but I mean, he's had a number of quotes, with, the Arminian's only Arminian because he doesn't read his Bible, or, maybe it wasn't him, but somebody like that. And you're just like, okay, but we all have the Bible though. Like, we're all like this guy is, an Adrian Rogers, for example, or any number, Leonard Ravenhill, or somebody like that who's not a Calvinist. Maybe they're not full on Arminian, but there's some flavor in between.
Sure.
And it's like, come on, this guy's been a believer walking with Christ for years. There is zero, he's probably more holy than you, as far as, killing sin and clinging to Christ. He knows his Bible. And to say, well, they just skip over Romans 9, or they skip over Ephesians 1. Again, we'll get there. But I just find it funny, because it's just like, I know that's not true, but I want to talk to somebody or have at least some discussion or debate about this, because again, if we spun the spotlight around on this person, the 4-point Calvinist, for example, what do you think about this, and this? They're going to probably answer, maybe even surprise themselves on how they say, or how they're going to witness, or everything else. I mean, because at the end of the day, like you just said, there isn't this unashamed, unabashed, totally unhinged free will, which I think a lot of people think that's what Arminians believe.
Yeah.
And even if they, and again, if that did, Well, if determinism is true, God determines that, right?
Yeah.
And so you really can't get out of it. And so
Yeah.
if determinism isn't true, and most Christians wouldn't say, even most Calvinists wouldn't say determinism is true. But then there's this level that God gives the ability, right? And that's what I'm hearing you say, and I've seen with other non-Calvinists, maybe a traditionalist or a Molinist or something, that it's still, God is still king. He is still the one. So if he desires to elect only certain group of people, okay, or if he desires to give everybody a responsible choice, okay, or if he holds everyone accountable and everyone, they can see the stars and there's a creator, and how did Abraham believe God and it was counted to him as righteousness, and whatever variation therein, it's still God who's in charge. It's God who's giving this ability, if you will, to trust him, right? Whether it's given to only a select group of people, which the Calvinist is never going to say, well, it's only 5% or 20% or 50% of the elect, everybody else is damned. You can't know, you can't see it. There's no markings, there's no spiritual anything. And so, keep searching, it's not there. And if it's not true, well, at the end of the day, we have to be responsible for where we are, right? And that's what I kind of focus on a lot of times, especially in my preaching. Where are you? Not you, Chris, but like where is the hearer? Have you heard the gospel? Do you see that there's creation? There must be a creator. Do you know that you're a sinner? Do you know that you've lied, cheat, stolen, committed adultery with your eyes and your heart, etc.? You've broken God's law. And so whether you're 5 or 50, you have to repent. How that works out in eternity, we'll get there and God will likely lay it out for us. And we'll say, okay. But it's just, sometimes it's just exhausting. Like you just said, James White calls Leighton Flowers a Pelagian. Like, he's not a Pelagian. And I don't even think James White knows what a Pelagian is, or anybody else for that matter, because we don't have a lot of his writings anyway. And he's kind of that boogeyman that we all want to say, oh, the Nazis. Everybody talks about Nazis in academia, right? Or, the communists. And it's just like China, Russia. We always have to have a bad guy. And it's kind of sad that Christians, we just act like the world so often with those types of diatribes. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, so let's move to Ephesians 1, and we'll look at Romans 9. How do you take, because I've heard people say, well, they don't preach Romans, or they don't preach Ephesians, or whatever. I've got Ephesians 1 up here, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, to the saints who are at Ephesus. Verse 4, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. In love, he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the promise of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace, with which he blessed us in the beloved, Jesus. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace, with which he lavished upon us in all wisdom and insight, making known the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ. And verse 11, in him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things after the counsel of his will. And then, of course, Ephesians 2, 1, you were dead in your trespasses and sins, which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air. Spirit is now working the sons of disobedience. How do you interpret those two passages, or those two sections?
Yeah, and just to kind of preface a little bit, I tell my students a couple things. One, whenever you're trying to like systematize a theology, right? Like you're trying to take all what you've been alluding to this whole time, where you're trying to take like these different elements of the Bible and fit them together like in a cohesive way. There's going to be places of tension within like any particular theological system. And so, for the Arminian, like maybe Ephesians 1, Romans 9 for sure. For the Calvinists, I always tell my students, I said, we have a hard time with those passages. Calvinists might have a little bit harder time with like Hebrews 6, where it seems to talk about tasting of the heavenly gift, partaking of the Holy Spirit, but then rejecting that, right? Which seems to be like an illusion of apostasy. And so I always tell my students, like, we need to be charitable because we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to take the scriptures, try to read in them as objectively as possible, and then trying to like understand them in the best way possible. In regards to Ephesians 1, I generally take the the same position as Thomas Helwys, who was an early Baptist. Leroy Forlines, who's a frugal Baptist theologian, argues something similar to this. But essentially, that God elected us in Christ, meaning our faith in Christ before the foundations of the world. Just one more caveat, and I'll go back to explaining that. I also tell our students we can't, just because we're Arminians, we don't get to like throw out predestination or election, right? We don't get to take those words and like mark them out of our Bible. Like those are biblical words, and so we have to use them, right? Like we can't avoid them. So what Thomas Helwys says is that God essentially looks down. I don't know if he uses this language exactly, but essentially God looks down the corridor of time, and he sees who throughout history has put their faith in Christ. And so conditional, right? It's not unconditional, but conditional upon people's faith in Christ, he then elects them before the foundations of the world. This is kind of like the whole, like knowledge is not causal, but we do believe in a kind of predestination, but it's in eternity, right? It's not in time. And so in eternity, God, so outside of time, God knows who's going to put their faith in Christ, and he therefore elects them. And so that's generally the way that Helwys and Forlines and people like J Matthew Pinson have argued that point.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's the predestination, because of course coupled with election. So it's still singular. It's not a general election. It's an individual election, which is similar to the Calvinists. Of course, the function is different.
Right.
Okay.
And
what do you say then? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would recommend, J Matthew Pinson, he's the president here at Welch College. He recently wrote a book called 40 Questions about Arminianism. Just like a terrific resource that I think kind of charts a helpful, nuanced position on a lot of this.
Okay. Cool. I'll put his name in the description and all that too. So verse 1 and 2, so you were dead in your trespasses and sins, which you once walked. How do you take that? I mean, again, you hear it time and again. Well, you were dead. Dead people, can't talk. Dead people can't respond. Dead people, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be made alive, and this is where you have a pre-faith regeneration. A lot of Calvinists lean that way. I get faith first. I'm regenerated, and then I have faith first. Excuse me. I get regenerated, then I have faith, because otherwise you're dead. Now there's plenty of biblical passages that run counter to that. I would say, but how do you interpret verse 1 of chapter 2 here?
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah, I think the Reformed Arminian essentially says, yeah, we are like entirely unable to respond to God on our own. Like if I'm in my sin without the working of the Spirit, like there's no possible way that I can respond to God in any way at all. That is only through the prevenient grace of the Spirit softening or enlivening my heart to some degree, in order for me to have the opportunity to respond. And so it's almost like we're kind of like we're real close, like right up until kind of the end there, right? And so I think the Calvinist just says, right, God, when he softens your hearts, he's calling, and it's effectual calling. It's going to happen on it never not happens when he calls. And the Arminian just says it's a prevenient grace. It's a softening of the heart in order to respond there.
All right, so Romans 9 then, classic kind of magnum opus, if you will, for many, and it's God's word, right? And we should all love it and read it and understand it, but we should all read it and understand it in the context, right? And we can't superimpose. which we like to do. Everybody, all stripes do, unfortunately. But just read it here and see how you interpret this passage, Romans 9, verse 9. Well, for this is what the promise said. About this time next year, I will return, and Sarah will have a son. And not only so, but also when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our father Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls. She was told, the older, quote unquote, will serve the younger. It is written, quote, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and compassion on whom I have compassion. That's another quote. So then it depends not on the human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, another quote, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth, end quote. So then he has mercy on whomever he wills and hardens whoever he wills. So what say you to that passage? Because that's
Yeah,
a lot of people. Well, it's hardening. God hardened you in this, and
sure.
you can't be unhardened yourself, and you're just trying to earn your salvation. You're just trying to do your own good works.
Mm.
Yada yada yada.
Yeah. Yeah, and no doubt Romans 9 is a difficult passage. I think for most Arminians, to say otherwise is probably being a little untruthful on that. However, I think I would like to take the chapter within the context of the book. I think Paul is talking about, he's talking to this relationship between a Jewish and Gentile church, where it seems like the Gentiles have left for a while and then they've returned back, right? And now he's talking primarily to this Jewish audience and really asking the question: has God went back on his promise to Israel? Right? It seems like he made a covenant back then. Like what's happened now? And so the response then, right, is God unjust? Right? Has he went back on the promises that he's made? And of course, Paul says, well, no, like he hasn't. However, right, the clarifying point is just because you're ethnically Jewish doesn't mean that you're spiritually Jewish, right? You're not of true Israel. And so I think the bigger context helps a little bit to simply say, he's talking about like individual salvation, not corporate salvation here. That in order to be part of true Israel, right, like it's not enough just to be of Abraham. You need to be, of the new covenant. And so I think that helps a little bit in trying to untangle some of the things there.
Gotcha. So then for, I guess, how do you interpret the hardening? Especially, you see Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Clearly God hated Esau. I want to say so much more. But
Sure, yeah.
I'll add something.
And I think listeners will have to decide, how compelling this is. I think Arminius says, and I know Forlines does, that these are. They argue that these is a type, right? And so I think Paul says they're like, you are like these people, right? So it's kind of a typology. It's an allegory. So it's not to say like God. It's a lineage, but that rather like he's making a metaphor of like those that aren't of the promise, aren't of the new covenant, right? They are like Ishmael, but those that are part of the new covenant, those are part of true Israel. They're part of the new covenant there.
Gotcha. Yeah, if you look, and of course I didn't pull it up, but these verses, just 9 through 18, most of it's quotes. And
right.
So how I would understand it, again, would be, well, you have to go, what is Paul talking about? Well, he's obviously referencing the Old Testament, right? A man who knew his Old Testament very well.
Yeah.
And I would say, even the quote of Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, that's actually, what is it? Malachi, I believe. And he's talking about nations there. And so I would take that more as not an individualistic thing, that he's talking in Genesis, where, I picked Jacob versus Esau. Furthermore, we're told by Christ to hate our parents. Well, in comparison to what? Well, in comparison to Christ, in comparison to loving God. We should love God more than we love doesn't mean we should hate actually our parents. And so I take a lot of it as hyperbolic in one sense, or illustrative, to say, this is the point. These are the extremes. How many times does Jesus use illustration in the Gospels? We look at Revelation, of course, a difficult book in one sense, but not in another sense. If you take it as, well, this is apocalyptic, and it's one of many other apocalyptic books of the time. And how are these being understood? What's a dragon? Is a woman really going to sit on woman really going to sit on the moon, or is that some sort of metaphor? What are the stars? Well, let's look at the Old Testament. Stars represent nations generally, and so you go through this and you have to say, okay, because we have, for good or bad, on all sides, we have a very it's probably for bad, honestly, a very, very strict, especially in America, especially in the West, or in particular in America, this strict literalist, quote unquote. But as I've learned in the last couple of years and kind of broadly studying, especially eschatology, and this isn't about eschatology, but it all kind of folds in together. You have to have it according to the literature, right? That's where the word literal comes from. You can't just automatically say, well, I'm a literalist and Jesus is a plank of wood or a hole because he's the door. Right. Well, not really. I mean, obviously it's metaphor, but it doesn't diminish it. And I think sometimes people, either fundamentalist or just a Bible Christian, Baptist, whatever, we hear that and we instantly, our faith gets shuttered and we're, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's not, you don't have to do that. You have to interpret it. I mean, again, does God own the cattle on just 1,000 hills, but other hills he doesn't own? Of course not. That's just metaphor. Right. And so there's lots of things. And I think Paul, to a degree, is using that even in Romans 9 too. But again, this isn't about me per se. So no, I appreciate that. What about something like, even, I didn't mention this earlier, but even like a John, well, we'll get there in a second. I will say that I do appreciate you saying, taking the broader context and being humble and saying, hey, this is a more difficult passage according to this theological theme or framework. But even at the end of Romans, remember there's no verse chapter breaks. A lot of people kind of get hung up on that for bad, unfortunately. We kind of pull things out of context. Chapter 11, verse 32, for God consigned all to disobedience that he might have mercy on all. Again, you have to read the whole breadth. And I've even heard more Calvinistic sermons focus just on the Romans 9 and then not get that back end at the end of chapter 11 there.
Yeah.
And read that because, well, what's the nearest context? Well, that's how we should interpret the Bible first and foremost. Yeah. Right? We can use other things as well, but we definitely need to have the near context and what I like to call authorial context. So Paul's writing Romans, and we can look at Ephesians or Philippians and how he uses words and phrases, or Luke and Acts type of thing. So anyway,
and Paul,
how would you go ahead?
He seems to do that like so often that he pairs like the sovereignty of God and then like human responsibility like back to back, right? So like Romans 9 seems to be pretty heavy on God's sovereignty, and then immediately in like Romans 10, it seems to place a pretty big emphasis on human responsibility. Or is it Philippians, right, where he says, essentially like work out your salvation, but it's God who works in you, So it's like, which one is it? Well, in some ways, it's both, right? So
yeah, and I think that kind of hits on, because this is something I've wrestled with for multiple years, and trying to have a better consistent approach to theology, to, of course, pastoring, preaching, and just my life. Just having kids and witnessing and how do you, there was just a shooting in Maine, who's responsible for that shooting of killing some 20 people?
Right.
The guy or not the guy, or God and the guy, legislators who allowed guns, even though there's gun laws, blah, blah, blah. Again, once it hits the rubber meets the road, a lot of times people will falter, for lack of a better word. And, I think I would urge everyone, especially listening, you have to understand these things for yourself, to be as faithful and consistent as you can. We're called to be responsible for these things. It's not just willy-nilly free will, do whatever, or, well, God determines it. So if I'm addicted to this substance or pornography, or I'm always angry, or I'm always gossiping, it's God's will. You can't get off the hook either way.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Yeah. We're culpable for our own sin, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the end of the day. Anyone would honestly should say that,
Mm.
and continue to try and understand the difficult passages.
Sure.
And I hope again this talk is helpful for many. Last kind of one of the other verses or chapter sections in the kind of classic debate, Arminian Calvin debate, Arminian and Calvinist debate. All right, so the John 6:37 in particular, I'll read 36. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All
Mm.
that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but that of him who sent me. What do you say to that? So there's clearly Jesus is talking about redemption. He's talking about salvation.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Father. This is very Christocentric and in one way Trinitarian. How do you interpret that passage? Verse 37
Yeah.
in particular. Father gives me will come to me.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this sounds a whole lot like some of the other passages that we talked about. That taken on its own seems to allude to just kind of this this unconditional election here. I think it's John 5. So right, just like the verse right before, or sorry, not the verse, the chapter right before. Uh, Jesus says, right? He says, "The Father's voice you've never heard. You do not have His word abiding in you, for you do not believe the one whom He has sent. You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is that they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. I come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me." So, kind of all throughout this chapter, right before chapter 6, is this language of refusal, reception, whether or not we respond, and so hopefully not too kind of trite, but it seems that what we have in 6, because it's coming after 5, is Jesus talking about a conditional election. So for those that do believe, right, God will bring those and give them to Christ.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So so it starts with 5 and then it is kind of capped off in
Yeah.
6 there, you're saying. Okay. Well, this is good. I think we can kind of wrap it up here in the sense that, do you have any further things you want to add? I'd like to get a few names of people if they want to. People want to be understand what they don't believe or understand Arminian theology more. What do you have anything else you want to add? Any other scriptures or reasons, thoughts?
No, I mean, I appreciate the conversation. I've had a few of these, both informally and formally, where I think it shows a lot of. I think it's really helpful for people that have slightly different theological viewpoints, not radically different, but slightly different, able to like converse and to talk about these things. I just think back to like 10, 15 years ago with like the big rise of, the Gospel Coalition and things like that, and really the Young, Restless, and Reform movement. And I felt back then, being in college at that time, I was like, I love the gospel. I feel such a kinship with so much of what's being put out by these guys. Yet I kind of feel like I'm on the outside a little bit. But I think through conversations like these and people kind of thinking more critically about this, I think there's been much more camaraderie as it relates to a rich biblical theological view on these things that includes people that have a closer view, but allows a certain amount of latitude on some of these kind of secondary matters. And so I say all that to just say I appreciate you inviting me on and kind of discussing some of these finer points here.
I appreciate you coming on for sure.
Yeah, I mean, as far as books go, J Matthew Pinson's written a decent amount on this. He wrote a book called Arminian and Baptist. He's edited some works by Leroy Forlines. One's called Classical Arminianism. Probably the best one that would be helpful if someone just really wanted to get a good idea of what do kind of normal Arminians believe. I think his book through Craigle Publications called 40 Questions on Arminianism is really helpful. And there's chapters about like, what do Arminians believe about Ephesians 1? What do they believe about Romans 8, Romans 9, John 6? What do they think about election and regeneration and all of this? So it does a really good, just nuanced position. That said, there's different varieties, and so that's kind of a Reformed Arminian perspective. If someone wanted to go look at Wesleyan Arminians, or you could read Roger Olson or someone like Thomas Oden or someone like that gives different viewpoints as well. So.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. So what you're telling me is that you don't earn your salvation as an Arminian. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I agree with Ephesians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Well, I appreciate it, brother. Where can people find you? I know we mentioned we met on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle, and any other places if somebody wants to connect with you, has some questions or something like that?
Yeah, I'm not super cool, so I only have Twitter. I don't have an Instagram, Facebook, or anything like that. So yeah, if you want to find me on Twitter, you can C_Talbot, TALBOT. I write for a handful of different publications. Just had a book released through Welch College Press called Christians and Culture, that talks about trying to develop a Christian worldview for our particular cultural moment. It's an edited volume, so there's chapters on science and sports and economics, a little bit of all of that. Would love for people to buy my book. But if not, they can always reach out to me at our college here at Welch College. And you can find my email on our website there.
Okay. Great, brother. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time. And I hope this was helpful for everybody listening as well, learning experience, if nothing else. So until next time, everybody, God bless. Thanks so much.